The house was always cold, even in summer. It was a coldness that came from the marble, not the weather. It seeped out of the tall, polished walls and the dark, heavy furniture that crouched in the corners. On days like today, the silence was even colder. It was a heavy, waiting silence, the kind that meant important people were present. The maid's daughter, now 19 and having grown up in the service corridors of this massive home, knew the rules. On days like today, she was to be less than a ghost. A ghost, at least, might be felt. She was to be aired. Her mother, the maid, had given her the instructions that morning, her hands twisting in her apron. They have an expert coming. From the city. To look at the lady, you dust the main hall, and then you disappear. Stand by the kitchen door. Do not speak. Do not look. Do not breathe. Now she was standing by that kitchen door, holding a clean, dry cloth. Her shadow stretched long on the parquet floor, the only part of her that dared to take up space. In the center of the main hall, under the giant crystal chandelier that was never lit, stood the painting. They called it the Lady in Blue. It was the family's anchor, the proof of their long, unbroken line of wealth and importance. It portrayed a woman from centuries ago, staring out with a look that was neither happy nor sad, but simply. Above it all, the family was there. The old man, the patriarch, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his chin high. His son, a man who had the same face but with a weaker mouth, shifted restlessly. The son's wife was checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. They formed a tight, expensive-looking circle around a small, neat man in a suit. This was the expert. The maid's daughter watched him. He was using a small light, peering closely at the canvas. The air was thick with the smell of old oil paint and lemon-scented polish. "It is exquisite," the expert said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Truly a remarkable state of preservation. The brushwork and the lace is masterful." The old man nodded, accepting the compliment as if he had painted it himself. "It has been in our family for generations. It is our history." Of course," the expert murmured. He moved his light to the bottom corner. And the signature. So crisp. The maid's daughter had seen the painting every day for as long as she could remember. It was as familiar to her as the worn-out linoleum in their small apartment over the garage. She had dusted its heavy gold frame 1,000 times. She had looked at the lady's blank eyes and wondered what she was thinking. But today, she looked. The expert was using French words now, when she understood perfectly. A master of the period. The technique. "It's parfait." The son's wife repeated the word, her pronunciation clumsy. "Parfait, yes, it's lovely." The maid's daughter felt a familiar, tiny wince. Her other grandmother, her mother's mother, had spoken French. It was the language of her childhood, a soft, secret river of songs and stories that had belonged only to them. Her mother, the maid, had forbidden it after the grandmother passed. "It will give them ideas," she'd whispered, her eyes full of fear. "We are here to work, not to be ... different." So the French stayed locked inside her, a hidden part of her soul. The expert was still talking, but a strange buzzing feeling had started in the daughter's ears. Something was pulling her eye. It was the signature. The expert had called it crisp. She squinted. From her post by the door, 30 feet away, she could just make it out. A dark, flowing script in the corner. It was crisp. Her heart gave a single, hard thump. She was suddenly back in her grandmother's tiny room, the air smelling of lavender and old books. Her grandmother was showing her a picture in a heavy, cracked leather art book. The page was yellowed. It was the same painting. The Lady in Blue. "She is from our part of the world," her grandmother had whispered in French, her finger tapping the page. She was a great lady, but sad. The maid's daughter had stared at the photograph in the book. It was black and white, but the details were clear. She had looked at the signature then, Two dot in the book, the signature was different. It wasn't crisp. It was hurried, angry, almost a scratch. It was messy. The expert was moving on, praising the frame. The family was smiling, their shoulders relaxing. The ordeal of being judged was over. They had been found worthy. The daughter's hand, the one holding the dustcloth, began to tremble. It wasn't just the signature. She strained, trying to pull the memory from her mind. There was something else. In the book, in the corner by the messy signature, there had been more. A tiny scratch. A line. No words. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, reading them aloud. A tiny fragment of French poetry, so small it was almost part of the shadow. She looked at the painting in the hall. There was nothing, just the clean, crisp, wrong signature. Her mother, sensing the sudden stillness from her daughter, shot her a look. It was the look that meant stop. The look that meant danger. It was a look of pure, primal fear. The daughter immediately dropped her gaze to the floor. The cold marble seemed to rush up at her. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. The expert was shaking the old man's hand. Priceless, he declared. Not just in value, but in history. Your family's history. The son's wife was already suggesting champagne. The tension in the room broke, replaced by polite, self-congratulatory laughter. The expert was led away toward the study. The family followed, their backs straight, their victory secure. The maid's daughter was left alone in the hall. The silence rushing back in, she stood frozen, her blood roaring. The painting hung before her, a silent, beautiful liar. The lady in blue stared back at her, her expression unchanged. But now it looked like a mask. She was just the maid's daughter. A girl who was paid to be invisible, to scrub floors and hold her tongue. But she knew French. And she remembered her grandmother's book, the most important thing in this house. The very symbol of the family's power was a fake. And as she stood there, trembling in the cold grand hall, a new, terrifying question began to form in her mind. Why? Why would they have a fake? And where? Where was the real one? The heavy oak door of the study clicked shut, swallowing the polite laughter of the family and their expert. The main hall was silent again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer just empty. It felt watchful. The maid's daughter stood rooted to the spot, her dustcloth dangling from a hand that felt numb. It's a fake. The thought was so enormous, so impossible, that her mind tried to shrink it. She tried to tell herself she was wrong. What did she know? She was a 19-year-old girl who scrubbed floors. He was an expert. He came from the city, wore an expensive suit, and used words that sparkled. She was just a her, the girl who understood those sparkling words perfectly, but was paid to pretend she didn't. Her memory of her grandmother's book must be wrong. It was probably just a cheap print, an imitation itself. The real painting was here. The real one had the crisp, clean signature. Her grandmother, in her old age, must have been confused. She tried to force this thought into her head. She needed it to be true. Because if her memory was right, then the man in the suit was either a fool or a liar. And the family was living under a lie that hung on their wall, broadcast to the world as their history. Her body finally unfroze. She had work to do. She moved on autopilot, walking through the grand cold rooms. She emptied the ashtrays in the parlor, though no one had smoked in them for years. She straightened the cushions on a sofa that no one ever sat on. With every automatic movement, her mind circled back, the signature. The signature. She could see it in her mind, the two versions side by side. The one in the hall was elegant, perfect, and steady. It was the signature of someone trying to sign a name. The one in her grandmother's book had been a slash of ink, full of energy and impatience, the way a true master might sign something they considered finished. And the French words, Where were the words? She found herself in the dining room, clearing away the silver coffee service from the family's earlier breakfast. Her mother was there, carefully inspecting the forks, her lips tight with concentration. The daughter picked up a porcelain plate, her thoughts a million miles away. Back in her grandmother's room, she remembered that day so clearly. It hadn't just been a random look at a book. Her grandmother had been crying, quietly. It was just after her mother had been scolded by the old man for breaking a cheap vase. Her mother had been the one crying then, humiliated. Her grandmother had pulled her close, her hands smelling of soap and rosemary. She had opened the book. "Do not let them make you small," her grandmother had whispered, her voice fierce, pointing to the lady in blue. "Your blood is just as good as theirs. Better, maybe." "What do you mean, Grandmere?" She had asked. Her grandmother had just tapped the page. "They think they own everything. But they don't own the truth. The truth is written here. Remember this." And she had read the tiny line of French poetry. A verse about a forgotten branch and a hidden heart. At the time, the daughter thought it was just an old woman's way of making her feel better. A strange, poetic fairy tale. Now, those words felt like a key. A key to something dark. The plate in her hand slipped. It didn't fall. Her mother's hand shot out like a snake, grabbing the edge before it could hit the polished floor. The silver tray rattled, the only sound in the room. Her mother didn't yell. It was worse. She spoke in a low, furious whisper. "What is wrong with you?" She pulled her daughter by the elbow, dragging her through the swinging door into the pantry. The door whipped shut, plunging them into the small windowless space. It smelled of floor wax and dried herbs. "Tell me." "Now," her mother commanded. The daughter flinched. She couldn't form the words. "It's nothing. I'm just tired." "Tired? I saw you in the hall. When they were with the expert. You were staring. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Her mother's eyes, usually just weary, were now sharp with a sudden, terrible fear. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Mama. I was looking at the painting." "The painting?" Her mother's voice went flat. "The painting is not for us. It is their painting. It is a piece of furniture, like the tables, like the chairs. You do not look at it. You do not think about it. You clean the frame, and that is all. Do you understand me?" "But do you understand me?" Her mother repeated, her fingers digging into the daughter's arm. "Yes, Mama, I—" The daughter hesitated. The fear in her mother's face was so much bigger than just the risk of breaking a plate. It was a deep, old terror. This wasn't about not meddling. This was about survival. "These people," her mother said, her voice dropping so low the daughter had to lean in. "They are not like us. They are rich in a way that is careless. They break things without even noticing. They can break us." She shook her daughter's arm gently. "You have a good, safe job here. We have a roof. We have food. Do not throw it away for nothing. Whatever you are thinking, stop." The daughter nodded, her throat tight. "I understand. I'm sorry." Her mother searched her face for a long second, then let go. "Good. Go and finish the silver. And keep your head down." Her mother left the pantry, the door swinging shut. The daughter stood in the dim light, her arm throbbing where her mother had grabbed it. Her mother's warning was meant to stop her. It was meant to bury the seed of doubt, but it had done the opposite. If the painting was just a painting, her mother would have been annoyed at her distraction. She would have called her clumsy. But she was afraid. Deeply, truly afraid. The seed of doubt didn't just stay. It began to sprout. Her mother was terrified of something connected to that painting. Her grandmother had told her to remember the truth hidden in that same painting. One wanted her to be blind. The other had tried to make her see. She finished her work for the day, her body moving through the motions, but her mind was clear and sharp. She was no longer confused. She was no longer doubting her own memory. She was filled with a new, cold certainty. The painting in the hall was a lie. And her mother's fear was proof that it was a dangerous one. That night, in her small, slanted roof room over the garage, she didn't sleep. The house was a dark, silent giant across the courtyard. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sound of her mother's steady breathing from the other cot, that she could not let it go. It was more than just a fake piece of art. It was a secret. Her grandmother had left her a clue, and her mother's panic had just confirmed the danger. She had to find that book. She had to know for sure. That night, the small room above the garage felt like a cage. The daughter lay still, listening to the sound of her mother's breathing, a slow, shallow rhythm that was half sleep, half worry. The fear she had seen in her mother's eyes had settled in her own stomach. It was a cold, heavy weight. But her grandmother's words, "Do not let them make you small," were a sharp, insistent heat beneath it. She could not sleep. She slipped out of her cot, her bare feet making no sound on the worn floorboards. In the corner of their tiny living space, under a pile of folded winter blankets, was her mother's old chest. It was the only thing her mother had kept from the grandmother, a small, dark wooden box that was always locked. Her mother kept the key on a string around her neck. The daughter's heart hammered. She crept to her mother's bedside. In the thin moonlight, she could see the string, a dark line against her mother's throat. Her hand trembled as she reached out. She was so close, she could feel the warmth from her mother's skin. She hooked a finger under the string, her movements agonizingly slow, and lifted the small, cold key. She held her breath. Her mother stirred, mumbled something, and turned onto her side. The daughter froze, her heart in her throat. But her mother's breathing only deepened. Back at the chest, the key turned with a soft, dry click. The lid lifted with a sigh of lavender and old paper. Inside were not treasures, just the few worn things that made up a life. A pair of baby shoes, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, a rosary. And at the very bottom, just as she had prayed it would be, was the book. It was heavy, the leather cover cracked and stiff. She carried it back to her cot and opened it, using the weak beam of her phone's light. There it was. The Lady in Blue. The photograph was old, black and white, but the detail was sharp. Her eyes flew to the bottom corner. The signature was just as she remembered, a wild, impatient slash of a name. It looked nothing like the tidy, careful script on the painting in the hall. And right beside it, so small it looked like a scratch, was the inscription. She read the French words, her grandmother's voice whispering them in her memory. La branche oublie, le cœur caché. The forgotten branch, the hidden heart. It was real. Her memory was real. The painting in the hall was a fraud. But as she sat there, the book in her lap, a new, colder realization washed over her. This wasn't just about money. A rich family could have a copy made for insurance, or while the real one was being cleaned. But they wouldn't have a wrong copy. They wouldn't have one with a different signature. They wouldn't have one that erased the inscription, unless. Unless the inscription was the reason for the fake. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. Tucked into the book's spine was another piece of paper, folded into a tiny square. It was brittle, yellowed with age. She unfolded it. It was an old birth certificate. It was not her grandmother's. It was her great-grandmother's. The daughter stared at the names, her mind struggling to connect them. The mother's name on the certificate. It was the same as the woman in the painting. The Lady in Blue. The family had always said the lady had no children. That her line had ended and the estate had passed to a cousin, the ancestor of the old man in the house. The certificate in her hand said that was a lie. The Lady in Blue had a child. A daughter. A forgotten branch who had been disowned, erased from the family history. And her grandmother. Her grandmother was the granddaughter of that disowned child. The blood drained from her face, leaving her icy cold. She was not just the maid's daughter. She was a descendant. She was, by blood, a part of the very family that had hired her to be invisible. The painting wasn't just a piece of art. It was the proof. It was her history. The dark family secret was not just art fraud. It was the theft of an entire lineage. The family in the house, the ones who had lived in luxury for a century, were not the main line. They were the cousins. The caretakers who had stolen the inheritance. They hadn't just replaced the painting. They had erased the evidence. A cold, clear anger settled over her. It was so pure, it burned away all her fear. Her mother's terror made sense now. Her mother wasn't just afraid of losing a job. She was afraid of what the family was capable of. She was afraid of the truth. The daughter closed the book. She put the key back around her mother's neck. She did not sleep. The next day, the family was hosting a small, exclusive luncheon for a visiting historian. The daughter was assigned to serve the wine. Her hands were steady. She moved through the dining room, a ghost in her black uniform, but her eyes were bright. The old man was in fine form, boasting. "Our family has been the guardian of this estate for over 100 years, he said, gesturing to the hall where the lady in blue presided over them. That painting is our link to our noble past. The historian, a woman with sharp eyes, nodded. A beautiful piece. A shame her line ended. It said she was quite the poet. The old man's son laughed. Poet? I'd never heard that. She just looks severe, if you ask me. The daughter was standing right behind him, a heavy bottle of red wine in her hand. Her mother, at the other end of the table, caught her eye. She gave a tiny, desperate shake of her head. Don't. The daughter looked at the proud, ignorant faces. She looked at the lying painting on the wall. She looked at her mother, trapped in a lifetime of fear, and she made a choice. She set the wine bottle down on the table with a firm, solid thud that the conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. The son looked annoyed. What is it? We need. That painting's a fake, the maid's daughter said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like glass. Her mother let out a small, choked gasp that the old man's face turned purple. What did you say? Get out, you're fired. The daughter did not move. She looked past him, at the historian. She's right, the daughter said, her voice gaining strength. The woman in the painting was a poet. She had a line of poetry inscribed in the corner of that painting. But it's not on this one. Because this one is a copy. The son stood up, his chair scraping loudly. This is insane. Mother, call security. What was the inscription? The historian asked, her voice quiet and sharp. The daughter turned to her. And in the dead silence of the room, she spoke the words. Not in a shout, but in a clear, proud voice that rang with her grandmother's memory. La branche oublie, le cœur cache. She said it in perfect, fluent French. The historian's eyes widened. The son's wife, who had faked the pronunciation just the day before, stared with an open mouth. It means the forgotten branch, the hidden heart, the daughter translated. She looked directly at the old man, who had gone pale. She wrote it for the child she had. The child you wrote out of the family history. This is slander. The old man whispered, sinking back into his chair. Is it? The daughter said. She was not a ghost anymore. She was the most solid person in the room. My grandmother was the granddaughter of that child. My great-great-grandmother was the lady in blue. She did not need to show them the birth certificate she had tucked in her pocket. The truth was on her face. It was in the old man's sudden, devastating collapse. The secret was out. The family's noble past was a lie they had built over a stolen inheritance. And the truth had not been uncovered by an expert, or a lawyer, or a detective. It was revealed by the one person they had never truly seen. The invisible girl who had been serving them their wine. The one who held the real history, the real bloodline, in her heart.